All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Donna Honar-Piche. I'm the Associate Curator of Art and Research here at ICA Miami. Thanks so much for joining us. We just concluded a really delightful week of seminars with Dr. Joshua Shannon and Stephanie Wakefield on climate and contemporary art. And I really want to thank our seminar participants for making it a really vibrant discussion. And thank you all for joining us today. So we're going to have two talks, and then we'll follow it with a discussion, and we'll open up to a Q&A with the audience. So just hold on to your questions after both of our speakers are done, and we'll have plenty of time to talk. So I'll first introduce Joshua Shannon, who is Professor and Director of Graduate Studies in the Department of Art History and Archaeology at the University of Maryland. His scholarship and teaching focus on art since 1945 and its relationships to social and cultural history, with special interests in ecology, landscape, and cities. He is currently completing a book called How and Why to Look at Art in the Time of Climate Change, 7 Lessons from Modern Art, under contract with the University of California Press. His previous books are The Disappearance of Objects, published with Yale in 2009, The Recording Machine, published with Yale in 2017, and Humans, Terra, Chicago, 2021. He has held visiting professorships at the Free University Berlin and the University of Hong Kong. So we'll start our first talk with Dr. Shannon, and we'll continue with Dr. Wakefield, and then we'll have a discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Donna. It's such a joy. I feel a lot of gratitude for the fact that I get to be in Miami this week with y'all. I think about climate change all the time, of course, and that means sometimes thinking about Miami. And Miami is not a place I've spent much time at all. So when Donna wrote to me kind of out of the blue and invited me to come and do this, I immediately wanted to come, and I'm so glad it worked out. It's been really fun to have the experience of being in seminar with many of the people who are in the room. And I'm delighted that there's a bunch of people here who are new to me and to this gathering. So thanks for being here. Thanks also to Jean Moreno, the host of my host, or whatever, my co-host. I've just had a really nice welcome here, so thanks. I want to start by just saying a couple of words about this book, which Donna just mentioned to you, that I have just finished, literally like 10 days ago. Not even. I don't know, almost exactly 10 days ago. I finished writing the manuscript for this book, which has now been sent out for peer review. So we don't actually have a title. We don't have a cover yet. This is my dream for the cover. Good, yeah, you like the cover? That's good. And this image does appear in the introduction. I think it might work. It's actually Myung-Ho Lee, super interesting South Korean artist. So anyway, it's with University of California Press, called How and Why to Look at Art in the Time of Climate Change, with the subtitle 7 Lessons from Modern Art. And it's not a really scholarly book. There are no footnotes in this book. It's meant to be legible to just general people who are interested in art and concerned about climate. And I think it might be worth just taking 1 minute to tell you about the structure of the book. The people who were in the seminar have heard me say some words about the book already, but it'll just help you to make sense of what I'm talking about today, since I will talk very little about climate, actually, in this talk. There are 7 chapters in the book, and each one of them, as I propose in the title, is a kind of lesson that we can learn when we look at modern art. And each of those lessons invites us to adopt a way of thinking, a structure of belief, a way of being that is indispensable to our effort to achieve a sustainable civilization, right? If we're going to confront the climate crisis, we need technical solutions, we need political solutions, but we also need ideological belief solutions. We cannot carry on with the kinds of beliefs that we inherited from the European Enlightenment and from industrial modernity. So each of the chapters invites a kind of a new way of thinking, often by looking at somewhat old modern art. So there's a chapter at the beginning on climate change, grasping climate change. It focuses especially on a local artist many of you know, Anastasia Samoilova, whose studio I visited this morning for the first time. Thinking Beyond the Human goes back to the 19th century and focuses on Van Gogh's biocentrism. Suffering and Resilience focuses on the Migration series, a great panel of works about migration by Jacob Lawrence. Getting Rid of Our Idea of Nature, Forgetting Nature, with the help of the photographer Stephen Shore. Learning from Time, positioning ourselves in a much, much longer, mentally, much, much longer space of time with the help of Nancy Holt. Adjusting Our Sense of the Sublime to include everyday, ordinary experiences with the help of V.S. Selmans. And then this 7th chapter is the one that I am kind of more or less actually going to just read out to you today. It's a short chapter, and it's from the end of the book. You'll see there's a little bit of awkwardness, maybe from the fact that this is written as a book, and I'm giving it as a talk. It refers back to chapters you haven't read, but for those of you in the seminar, you've at least had a chance to look at the ideas. Carl Gustav Kars's Memory of a Wooded Island in the Baltic Sea of 1835 focuses our attention on 3 great oaks. One trunk in shadow in the left foreground twists out of view, just about lifeless and half claimed by a vine. On the other side of the picture, another tree, battered by years of storms, leans to the right. Some of the leaves are prematurely brown, a large patch of bark at the base has fallen away, and the top of the trunk pokes awkwardly above the foliage, already rotting and broken off. At the center, finally, is the painting's protagonist, a fearsome tree leaning into the coastal wind, gnarled by decades of twisting into the air for light. Its highest points have also snapped off, and the 2 major branches closest to us have been sacrificed by the tree as deadwood. This is something that oaks do. One of these, gray and stripped of bark right in the center, will clearly snap and crash down in a coming storm. But the tree, and this is the pathos and the joy of this painting, supports an awkward crown. Thousands of photosynthesizing leaves grouped into 5 or 6 ungainly bunches. Aside from human beings, trees are certainly the type of organism that appears most often in art, or at least in human art. The largest of the plants, and among the ones we live close to every day, trees dominate our understanding of landscapes. And trees have also long provided a cipher for all kinds of human thought about our own lives, about our relationship to the world we inhabit. In our drawings, paintings, photographs, sculptures, videos, etc., we feature trees as metaphorical figures of our own struggles. Trees in art, on the other hand, also function as model cases for thinking about our behavior towards everything that is not human, as figures for our use and abuse, our care and cultivation, our sympathy and collaborative thriving. Consider just how often, briefly, trees have appeared in human art. They've been among the most consequential features in art in this book by Myung-Ho Lee, Anastasia Samoylova, Vincent van Gogh, Georgia O'Keeffe, Andy Goldsworthy, and have played supporting roles in lots of works by others, Gabriela Salazar, Jacob Lawrence, Alison Janae Hamilton, blah, blah, blah. The trees in these works have functioned sometimes as proxies for the human being, sometimes as exemplars of the whole non-human world, and very often as barometers of the relationship between the two. Through several additional examples, this final chapter takes a core sample of contemporary art's preoccupation, not only with trees, but also with fungus, that strange life form, neither plant nor animal, on which all other land-based life depends. Drawing on recent scientific discoveries about how trees and fungus communicate, we'll look here at artworks that show humans and non-humans in active exchange. We'll focus especially on the Kenyan-American artist Wangechi Mutu, whose collages and sculptures mix a history of exploitation with hopes for the future, presenting protagonists who dissolve the lines that supposedly separate one species from the next. So consider next another great tree picture, Andreas Gursky's Schwimmbad Ratingen swimming pool of 1987. This is a large-scale photographic print. Many of you know how Gursky works at a large scale. By 1987, he was already doing that, of a public pool near Düsseldorf. And it offers an expertly pitched investigation of the human place within the landscape. The human beings in this picture, scattered across the foreground and midground, appear as isolated figures, in pairs, in small groupings. They're at leisure, mostly white and young. They occupy a neatly paved stone surface, a large lawn, and the pool itself. The shape of the pool, vaguely like a wedged seashell, is at once geometric and biomorphic. That shape is mirrored in the lozenge of the lawn, which expresses a very delicate balance between the organic grass itself and the intensive human efforts in landscaping. Gursky's high viewing position makes for a horizon perhaps 150 meters away, maybe slightly further, allowing the picture to encompass a few dozen trees. About as many trees, in fact, as there are people. These trees are of several species, clearly, each with its own characteristic habit and leaf color. Most of these trees loosely form a wood together, but one taller tree in the center background, maybe a cypress, breaks the horizon and makes a neat counterpoint with the pool slide to the right and below it. There's one other tree that stands out slightly, it may be hard to read in this light, on the lawn closest to the pool, which provides shade for several loungers. Now, my point in describing this picture in this way is to emphasize just how far Gursky has gone to draw an analogy between human beings and plants. The piece of the world Gursky shows us has been intensely ordered by humans. Taxes, engineering, lawn care produce this minor paradise. But those human beings are literally overshadowed by their arboreal companions. I almost want to say by their colleagues who ring and define that space, who make the space. Gursky's picture may not be a radical statement of ecology. I think it isn't. In fact, the teens are actually the stars of this picture. But it certainly proposes a vision of humans successfully belonging to a landscape, rather than mastering it. It may even suggest to us that every pool, every town, every human project of any kind presents us an opportunity to soften the sharp distinction that we so often draw between the human and the non-human. It may invite a loosening, even an eventual undoing, of that central pernicious project of modern civilization, the classification of society as progressively ever more the opposite of nature. In recent years, biologists have been making stunning discoveries about trees. We all know that plants respond to warmer weather by fruiting, that branches detect and grow toward light, and that vines explore for climbing surfaces. But the ability of trees to respond dynamically to situations, and in fact to communicate with each other and with other species, turns out to be far deeper and more elaborate than we had previously understood. Building on research by Suzanne Simard and others, the German forest manager Peter Wohleben's book, The Hidden Life of Trees, outlines some of the more remarkable discoveries. And some of you will know this book. It was very popular about a decade ago. Wohleben relates, for example, that some trees can identify precisely which insects are feeding on them and then release a pheromone tailored to attract the exact predators that feed on that species of insect. Other trees, he reveals, actually collaborate with their neighbors of the same species by declining to grow thick branches in one another's direction so as to better and more equally share the light. Perhaps even more remarkably, it also appears that trees can make decisions collectively. In most years, beeches and oaks, for example, produce little to no fruit, right? They conserve their energy for 2 to 8 years in order to be able to produce what's called a mast year, a major year of dropping an overabundance of nuts or acorns. This banking of effort makes it difficult, right? The reason they do this is that if they bank their effort in this way, it makes it difficult for even robust predators to eat through the crop, ensuring the propagation of the new species, right? If you just produce a little fruit every year, it could easily get eaten by the hogs. If you wait and produce all your fruit at once, even a really healthy group of hogs won't eat all the acorns. What is most remarkable about this process is that the stands of trees coordinate their mast years. They all wait until the season when they will explode together in flower and fruit, right? And no one knows how exactly this communication happens, other than that it clearly happens through the root system, root to root connected by fungus. Wohlleben, another example, Wohlleben cites research too, showing that plants can in fact learn, reacting, for example, to apparent excess of water less cautiously over time. But scientists still cannot say where this learning is stored or how it's accessed without a brain. What is clear is that our traditional notions of decision-making and of consciousness are radically inadequate, right? We've inherited an idea of consciousness and intelligence and decision-making that is based on a kind of Enlightenment distinction between the human individual and other beings, right? It turns out these other beings are far, far more like us in a cognitive way than the Enlightenment wanted us to think. Okay, one other preliminary case. The UK artist Tim Knowles has playfully engaged the porous boundaries separating human and non-human forms of expression, with a series of works in which he outfits trees with pens and easels so that while they sway in the breeze, they make drawings, which he then exhibits. This example, Larch 4 pen on easel number 1, for example, turns 4 low-hanging branches into fingers and invites us to see the tree as an author, as an expressive agent. Of course, the resulting pictures are not intended by the trees, and I think that's part of the gentle humor of Knowles, right? It's not that we think that the trees wanted to make these drawings, but the work proposes not only that humans and trees might collaborate, but also that trees, in fact, might have something to say. Okay, to pull this little introductory section together, it's tempting to see these 3 tree works that we've just looked at as embodying a historical progression. The German Romantic sees the tree as a stand-in for the human. The Dusseldorf school photographer of the 1980s establishes a fragile parallel between human life and plant life. And the contemporary conceptualist seeks to record the intelligence and expressivity of trees. To some extent, I think that such a narration of European thought is accurate, right? Modern Western human beings have very gradually begun to accept that their role in the larger world is one of parity, not of distinction and mastery. Needless to say, the full history of these ideas is, of course, contradictory and recursive. There's no simple way you can tell this as a progression. I mean, just to say the most obvious things, the Romantics actually helped produce the idea of ecology itself. The word ecology came out of European thought within a few years after the Caras picture. And of course, our contemporary society, to say the most obvious thing, is not nearly conscious enough, right, of our embeddedness in the web of life. If it were, we wouldn't be facing the acute crisis we're now in. If contemporary art has continued an old preoccupation with trees, it's also picked up an obsession with the much smaller organisms, such as bacteria, algae, and especially fungus. Here, too, artists are moving together with science, which has recently discovered just how indispensable and also how strange some of these organisms are. Research into collaboration among such organisms is proving quite disruptive to our received ideas of species, individuality, and intelligence. To begin with, take the discoveries about fungus. Wohlleben observes that fungus is necessary to most of the communication among trees that he observes. He writes, "Fungal connections between roots transmit signals from one tree to the next, helping the trees exchange news about insects, drought, and other dangers." End quote. It is, in fact, this fungus-tree network that, as some of you, I'm sure, are aware, Simard has famously dubbed the wood wide web, right? The way trees communicate is through their fungal connections. Fungi are super interesting. They're ancient, they're contemporary, they create medicines, they're poisons. They vary from the microscopic, right? Like famously, a teaspoon of soil has thousands of miles of little fibers of tiny, tiny microscopic fungus in it. Other individual organisms of fungus have stretched across thousands of acres for centuries, growing to hundreds of tons. Another book that some of you probably know, that came out slightly more recently by the biologist Merlin Sheldrake. I'm so grateful for his wonderful name. It's called Entangled Life. And it relates the many wonders of fungus, its foundational role in life on Earth, at least on land, its interrelationships with other species, and its forms of cognition. It turns out that it's not just that most plants cannot survive without collaborative fungi in their roots, Sheldrake notes. Plants can also detect which strains of fungus are providing them the most benefit and selectively provide more carbon to them in return. So there's an incredibly well-tuned series of exchanges going on between the fungus and the roots and their plants. Discoveries of these detailed forms of collaboration, doubted and overlooked by scientists for centuries, have led some biologists to propose replacing the term evolution with involution in order to express that the way that species change over time is to involve themselves better with other species around them. Sheldrake also writes about, for example, several species of termites in Africa that have been cultivating for fungus for over 20 million years. Since the termites cannot, in fact, themselves digest the wood that they chew the wood and carry it into the colony and regurgitate it on the fungus, which performs the chemical breakdown for them before they re-ingest it. Amazingly, research now shows that the termites can even regulate the temperature, moisture, and the relative levels of oxygen and of CO2 inside the fungal colony, some examples of which are 30 meters high and have been functioning for thousands of years. Citing further plant, insect, and fungal behaviors such as these, including the ability of some fungi to navigate mazes, Sheldrake asks, are network-based life forms like fungi, I'll read this in a second. I'm reading you another passage first. Sheldrake asks, are network-based life forms like fungi or slime molds capable of a form of cognition? Can we think of their behaviors as intelligent? He answers provocatively, complex information processing and intelligent behaviors can arise without brains. Citing experiments with flatworms, Sheldrake suggests that these forms of cognition require us to reimagine even human intelligence. And I love this little passage. Researchers wondered whether, if they trained a flatworm to remember features of its environment and then cut off its head, it would retain the memory when it has grown a new head and brain. Remarkably, the answer is yes. The flatworm's memory appeared to reside in a part of their body outside the brain. These experiments suggest that even within the body of brain-dependent animals, such as us, the flexible networks that underpin complex behaviors need not be limited to a small region inside the head. So, in addition to recasting our understandings of decision-making and intelligence, research into these complicated interspecies collaborations is also casting doubt on our notion of individuality. Neither specific species nor specific individual organisms seem to exist with the bounded interrelations, with the bounded independence that taxonomy has pretended. Emblematic of this are lichens. It turns out that a lichen is not actually an organism, but rather a phenomenon that arises only as a collaboration between a fungus and an alga. And there's various fungi and algae that do this. There's some species that can only exist, in fact, when they collaborate to become a lichen. Sheldrake writes, the closer we get to lichens, the stranger they seem. To this day, lichens confuse our concept of identity and force us to question where one organism stops and another begins. Other research in recent decades on the bodies of human beings and other large mammals indicates that we too are defined as much by interspecies collaboration as by any kind of individuality. Cows, famously, as Sheldrake points out, cannot digest grass. It's the microbial species in their guts that do it. And even human beings, right? Each individual human body, in fact, has, by weight and by number of cells, more microbial cells than it does cells of its own DNA, right? So of the, 167 pounds of organism standing at the podium here, more than half of it does not have my genetic code in it. It's other organisms. Scientists have proposed the term the holobiont to refer to a variety of organisms. We might think of a lichen or a human being that behave as a unit. And Sheldrake writes wonderfully, quote, "If we only have words that describe neatly bounded autonomous individuals, it's easy to think that they actually exist. Instead, we must realize that, as a team of leading symbiosis researchers have put it, there have never been individuals. We are all lichens." If we look back at Anastasia Samoilova's photograph of a lichen, I say look back for those of you who are in the seminar. This is something we looked at on Monday. A Miami photographer, local photograph. If we look at this picture of lichen growing on a moist wall in Miami, we can now see just how apt a subject it makes for her purposes. Lichens often appear as the first life form in a given environment. For example, after a wildfire, right? If all life forms are killed, very often the first life forms you see are lichens. They help to digest minerals from rock and make it available as soil. Moss often develops then on successful lichen, which in turn enables other forms of life to put down roots and so on. Not definitively one organism or another, and just about inseparable from what it grows upon, lichen dissolves boundaries both physical and conceptual. Lichen is among the most basic expressions of ecology, of the web of interrelations that join the non-living to the living, the fungus to the plant, and all forms of life with human beings. Samoilova's Florida lichen, like each of us, is a temporary energetic arrangement of matter. Nature is not the ground we walk on. It is us, and we are it. Among the more prominent artists working directly with fungus and microbes is Annika Yi, who exhibited a work in Milan, for example, in 2022 called Biologizing the Machine, Spillover Zoontica. And it was a work that was designed in collaboration with the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences at the Università di Studia Milano Bicocca, which is the neighborhood where this exhibition space is. It comprises 7 glass panels, each of them hanging in the exhibition space like a two-sided painting. The artist filled each panel with what's called a Winogradsky culture, that is to say, a tiny, diverse ecosystem of soil, bacteria, and algae. Assembled using local soil, with aerobic life forms growing near the top and anaerobic ones below, the panels function, in the words of the exhibition catalog, as a, quote, portrait of the region. Meanwhile, electronic displays track the output of hydrogen sulfide while the colors and patterns of each panel change through periods of growth and decay. Right? It's a kind of painting, but the human being isn't directing the painting, only collaborating in the conditions that produce it. These panes of glass are colorful, expressive, I want to say. They seem to echo abstract expressionist canvases by Mark Rothko, for example, the later seascapes of J.M.W. Turner, maybe, or even, to quote something we talked about in seminar, the complementary orange and blue that we see in some of the landscapes, still lifes, and self-portraits of Vincent van Gogh. If these works offer a passing resemblance to earlier art, however, they are materially and conceptually very different. Rather than offering landscape painting's traditional condition of an upright visual mastery, right, where we look at the landscape and kind of possess it intellectually, these pictures contain, or rather are, the landscape. Denying us a conventional detached survey of the land, Yi instead temporarily invites us in the living earth. It's a logic not of control, but of attention and belonging. Your story, My Curse, is a grand diptych. When I say grand, you'll see this in a picture in a minute. These are about 5 feet tall, of ink and collage on mylar, made by Wangechi Mutu. It presents us with 3 creatures. They seem to be observing some kind of ritual, or involved in harsh labor of some kind, or perhaps simply cavorting, dancing. Neither strictly human, nor clearly something other than human, these animals stride across a landscape at once florid and gruesome, their bodies blossoming in rich, inky blotches of red, yellow, and green-brown. Take the yellow figure at the top of this vague pyramid, the one riding the shoulders of the character below. This figure looks out at us warily. Brandishing an exposed mottled skin, this character, it's hard to pinpoint any gender, boasts hair or a headdress of looping gold lines and gray feathers, some of which look eerily like fish. Its eyes and lips, in fact, are collaged from photographs, and Mutu has used a fragment from a pornographic magazine, a woman's back, arm, and breast, to form the nose. Its left ear and earring come together out of pictures of human figures in spider webs, and it sports a long, strange palmate goatee. The crouching figure just below that supports itself on a foot made of fish and steel machinery. Its hand is formed by reptile skin, human fingers, and the head of an unidentifiable quadrupedal mammal. Mutu has collaged its mouth in part from a disembodied leg in fishnet stockings, and has bestowed it with a slithering tongue in the form of another human hand. Its butt, or skirt, explodes with a riot of flowery fabric, banana skin, mold, grass, feces, evoking endless growth, but also disease. It furthermore suggests the banana skirt famously worn by Josephine Baker, perhaps the most infamous token of the erotic othering of the black female body. For its part, the gremlin prancing on the right, with its blood-red face and neck, walks on feet of a bird. A long protrusion ringed by 3 human legs sprouts from its skull. We might read this as regal plumage or as a streaming gunshot wound. This creature also holds out in its left hand a talismanic phallus that Mutu has collaged together from pictures of an African sculpture and a cobra ready to strike. Meanwhile, it coughs up a flying constellation of frog parts, specks of bloody earth, and strands of brown grass, which, of course, then merge with those extruded by the bent-over figure in the other panel. This delightful, horrifying labor ritual party unfolds in an aqueous, foggy landscape, populated by serpentine grasses exploding into bloody flowers. The work evokes erotics and objectification, growth and death, play and violence. Its grasses are feces, its blossoms are bloody wounds. Its fungal splotchiness suggests both fecundity and disease. The work gives us burned continents and fresh youth. It offers us suffering and also renewal, the relentlessness of life. In your story, My Curse, as in her art generally, Mutu casually puts blackness at the center of things, just as Western culture has almost always done with whiteness, even while insisting at the same time on the porosity and the fictional quality of racial categorization. Her imagery also dissolves the traditional boundaries separating genders and species, and even the rigid mental lines we've built separating one organism or individual from the next. My reading of your story, My Curse, here is deeply indebted to the literary scholar Chelsea Michael Fraser, who sees in this work both sexual violence and also sexual pleasure, both the agony of colonialism and the affirmation of alternative notions of beauty. Reading the work as a reminder that the climate crisis is borne radically unevenly by different groups of people across the globe, Fraser also identifies the centrality of its interspecies logic, its insistence, as she puts it, on non-distinctions between different material bodies. Mutu herself, who lives both in Nairobi and in New York, was born in Kenya in 1972. She grew up in Nairobi's middle class. Her mother was a nurse and a midwife who owned a pharmacy. Her father was a teacher and owner of a paper importing business. But she often traveled out of the city on weekends to the north, to the countryside, to visit her relatives among the Kikuyu people. After she went to high school in Wales and she went to college in New York, she ended up getting an MFA, a period of real difficulty and some poverty for her at Yale, and she's lived in the US and Kenya ever since. Mutu talks about how her background among the Kikuyu people has proven really formative for her artistic consciousness. A farming people, the Kikuyu were forced off their land in the colonial period into labor camps and prisons by the British, and subjected often to torture, including castration, sodomy, and amputation. The Mau Mau resistance movement, which led to the independence of Kenya, did so not without extreme violence of its own kind, often very brutal. In a statement called "The Power of Earth in My Work," Mutu has remarked, "The bodies in my art are often racked with wounds of war and yet keep on, despite missing or twisted limbs." In that same statement, Mutu observed that her art is also about, quote, "the work that falls to women in times of violence, the essential work of binding communities, mending families, and restoring rhythms." Indeed, I think we have to see Mutu's art as embodying a kind of eco-intersectionality in which the struggles of people of color, of women, and of non-human species are seen as intertwined. The art historian Chika Okeke-Ogulu quotes Mutu on this intersection. She says, "I feel like our illnesses are the Earth's illnesses. Our own lack of regard and respect for the Earth is related to our lack of regard for our own humanity." Like the art of Jacob Lawrence and the writing of Ross Gay, which a number of us considered earlier in the week, Mutu's art proposes that joy is not a condition apart from suffering, but rather an essential component for resilience under hardship. Her response to the ongoing legacies of colonialism, patriarchy, and ecological devastation is an Afrocentric ecofeminism, a universe dogged by terror, but animated by hope. In more recent years, Mutu has turned to making large-scale sculptures, populating museums with three-dimensional figures from her interspecies world. Sentinel-1 of 2018, made from earth, wood, and bits of stone, concrete, and gourd, is a tall, standing creature, very much like a female human being, and only slightly taller. I guess to counter this in the gallery is to come up, your head, I guess my head, comes up to somewhere around the breast or the shoulder, somewhere in that zone. Red Kenyan soil forms most of the body, including breasts, belly, and vulva. But tree branches within the soil ingeniously define faceted musculature and ligaments. Wood emerging from the buttocks and legs forms two awkward feet, one like a stump, the other like an enormous high-heeled boot. The figure entirely lacks a left arm, while the right arm clings awkwardly to the belly and the back. Its head, or rather this protrusion where a head might be, is a long, worn, and broken branch, veined and blank. This limb head resembles a giant jawbone, suggesting a simple weapon. A fragment of wood pressed into the right shoulder looks like a seashell or like teeth. Further scraps of uncertain materials around it look like shrapnel left in flesh. The other shoulder, the left one, capped with a carved gourd, is at once decorative and ghastly. Meanwhile, a single piece of shining quartz emerging just above the buttocks at the base of the spine suggests a glowing force emanating from inside the figure. This character is both primitive and post-apocalyptic. an ancestor or shaman, as well as a desert monster of climate disaster. Maimed and cobbled together from detritus, its belly is just swollen enough to suggest fecundity and new life. The figure confronts us, it comforts us, or simply, as the title suggests, watches out for us. It embodies suffering and resilience. It is one of us and something different. Like us, it is built from the earth, from molecules borrowed from other plants and animals, from the planet itself. Sentinel-1 is just the first in a series of guardian tree people in Mutu's works. The forests of central Kenya, Mutu has noted, were crucially important to the Mau Mau rebellion of the 1950s, offering fighters shelter and concealment, at least until the British combated the movement with military deforestation. Trees are a place of resistance, radicality, and renewed spiritual determination, Mutu said in a 2023 interview. They are key in our fight for freedom then and now. And she cites being influenced by Wangari Maathai, whom many of you will know as this very important ecological feminist activist in Kenya. By intermingling black bodies with other species and with Earth, I do want to emphasize Mutu runs a calculated risk. As we considered this week in seminar, some thinkers have argued that if we soften the distinction between humans and other creatures, we might end up further objectifying people of color, right? That to say humans are the earth could redound badly for some human beings. In an essay called Troubling Ecology, Fraser, the scholar on Mutu who I mentioned, quotes Christine Gerhardt specifically on this risk. Quote, "The symbolic association of blacks with wild, beastly nature has reinforced the exploitation of blacks in American history." For Mutu, however, entangling the human with the non-human is indispensable. It's part of the quest for justice. She titled an early collage, Intertwined, and has used the word again and again, including for the title of her 2023 solo exhibition at the New Museum in New York. Introducing that exhibition in its catalog, she wrote, "This project is about a very real connection to each other and to everything that has ever existed." Mutu sees her making process, in fact, as a practice of communication and reciprocity with living and also non-living materials on this planet. Consider the hybrid of human, tree, soil, stone, etc., that is rose quartz of 2016. Mutu made this sculpture, like Sentinel-1, with soil that she gathered near her studio in Nairobi, together with paper, pulp, quartz, and 2 different kinds of wood. The resulting figure is as much earth as person. Such recognition of intertwinement does not, for Mutu, mean ignoring altogether the special condition of being human. She writes, "I want people to feel how incredible our role as a human species is, how important it is to be a humane human." She adds to that, "I want us to recognize how significant it is that we are all from the same family in Africa, how important all the soil and the pigments and the bones and the leaves and the paper and the bacteria and the water are, and how much they speak on our behalf about us if we speak on their behalf about them." In yet one more statement called Art, This Old Medicine, Mutu remarks that art making is at its very core an activity of empathy enhancement. A human deliberately, slowly, decisively marking or carving or molding or turning something into another thing, purposely giving material another way to exist. The process of making art, she writes, echoes the way the universe itself was created by continuing to move energy into other forms of energy. If, for example, Van Gogh, nearly 150 years earlier, as some of us considered, figured root and branch and grass and sun as a single form of energy, if he painted his jawbone as if it were the stem of a sunflower, Mutu carries that tradition into our century of climate change. Mutu's world brushes away our fictions of separateness. Let's look at one more sculpture. Sentinel-4 of 2020. This watching, warning, helping figure is built on the same vocabulary of soil and wood as the early Sentinel sculpture we just looked at. Slightly taller than a person, this figure is both fearsome and endearing, both monster and mother. With 5 legs, a hollow body, and spindly wooden limbs, this sculpture has a more tree-like appearance than Sentinel-1. Its head, however, is far more human, including a pair of cavities like eyes, a protrusion on the top like hair or a headdress, and a serpentine branch that abstractly marks out nose, chin, jaw, and throat. Black strands hang down from the figure's hips, looking at once like horsehair, stripped bark, or in fact a human skirt. Recent research has shown that trees can in fact warn each other. They are sentinels. Wolleben writes of this amazing story of the umbrella thorn acacia in the savanna in Africa, which has been observed passing on the message that giraffes have come to feed on them. I'm quoting Wolleben here. Acacia trees that are being eaten by these passing giraffes give off a warning gas, specifically ethylene, that signals to neighboring trees of the same species that a crisis is at hand. Right away, all the forewarned trees in response also pump toxins into their leaves to prepare themselves. I think it's perhaps not entirely a coincidence that Mutu, who also warns us, works alongside other species with and in collaboration with acacia wood. Anna Lowenhaupt Singh's book, The Mushroom at the End of the World, offers a global interspecies anthropology, specifically of the extremely pricey mushroom called the matsutake. It grows especially well in forests that have been logged by human beings. In its very name, the field anthropology announces its focus on human beings, its anthropocentrism. But Singh trains her attention on global ecosystems of migration, invention, and work, including not just humans, but fungus, trees, and many different groups of human beings. The book's many stories are tales of both devastation and resilience. Singh opens her book, the first page she just comes right out on the first page beautifully. She opens her book by characterizing the historical pivot presented by our moment, by the 21st century. It's, I think, worth quoting this at moderate length. She writes, "Ever since the Enlightenment, Western philosophers have shown us a nature that is grand and universal, but also passive and mechanical. Nature was a backdrop and resource for the moral intentionality of man, who could tame and master nature. It was left to fabulists, including non-Western and non-civilizational storytellers, to remind us of the lively activities of all beings, human and not human." Several things have happened to undermine this tradition of labor. First, all that taming and mastering has made such a mess that it's unclear whether life on Earth can continue. I think it's an overstatement, but not by much, maybe. Second, interspecies entanglements that once seemed the stuff of fables are now materials for serious discussion among biologists and ecologists, who show how life requires the interplay of many kinds of beings. Humans cannot survive by stomping on all the others. Third, women and men from around the world have clamored to be included in the status once given to man. Singh ends the statement with a bracing declaration: "Without man and nature, all creatures can come back to life." Singh's opening text beautifully encapsulates the condition, I think, that is figured by the art of Wangechi Mutu, and of Annika Yee, Knowles, Gursky, even Karus. We must now learn what many civilizations before and at the edges of modern industrial society already knew: that there is no nature, no man, only a web of countless creatures, human beings among them. Okay, a final turn to another thinker before closing. In making this argument, Tsing follows on the work of the Jamaican writer Sylvia Wynter, who in an influential essay with an extremely long title that's aimed at thinking, quote, towards the human after man, narrates the history of philosophy that accompanied colonialism and slavery. For centuries, European philosophy, as Wynter put it, portrayed Native Americans as, quote, the very acme of the savage, and black people as, quote, the ostensible missing link between rational human beings and irrational animals. Sketching a path out of such logics of domination, Wynter declares boldly that, quote, the struggle of our new millennium requires abandoning our traditional idea of man, a Western conception of the human that for the most part encompasses only the powerful, and replacing it with an idea of the well-being and therefore, quote, the full cognitive and behavioral autonomy of the human species itself / ourselves. In this amazing account, right, that we need to give up man in order to have humanity, Wynter remains relatively focused on human beings, more so, I think, by far than Mutu does. But the figure she imagines requires that we do massively expand our very concept of what a human being is. She writes that, quote, all our present struggles, including social justice and sustainability, are fundamentally just differing facets of the central man versus human struggle. Earlier in this book, I argued that one important cause for our global crisis lies in our mistaken concept of nature. But the concept of man, nature's opposite, is the other half of that problem. Man has always been an agent on top of, against, consuming of nature, including many other human beings. One key value of Mutu's art lies in its abandonment of man. Imagine, as a thought experiment here at the end, any typical painted portrait, or let's say specifically a self-portrait by Rembrandt. And this is one that hangs in Washington, and I have seen a lot and love. I love this painting. Now, imagine this picture hanging in a gallery just beside Sentinel 4. Rembrandt's painting establishes the sovereignty, the autonomy, and the wisdom of a white bourgeois man. It doesn't embody absolute power by any means. Rembrandt was just a middle-class artist, after all. But it does convey a position of control and authority, one that most other human beings, we must say directly, in the 17th century, as today, could never claim. Mutu's work refuses this traditional humanist function. Working from the perspective of the 21st century, Mutu offers an alternative, one in which authority never rests with some human beings, nor even with human beings as a whole, but rather with a global, intergenerational web of relationships. The writer Michael Pollan, in a recent book about psychedelics, that some of you probably know, alerts us to some of the arguments advanced by people like the philosopher Henri Bergson, that consciousness is not a phenomenon located in this person or that, but rather a field inherent in the universe which our brains, like radio receivers, can tune into on various frequencies. If you're interested in this idea, another person who's been working on it, and I've only recently become aware of his work, so I don't know that much about it, is this philosopher named Galen Strawson at University of Texas, who uses the term panpsychism for this. It's actually a pretty old word, panpsychism. The idea that consciousness is in everything, not just in what we think of as sentient beings. The new materialist Jane Bennett, whom we talked about in seminar, also quotes the famous French sociologist Bruno Latour on a similar point about agency. And I really like this. Quote, there is no object, no subject, but there are events. I never act. I'm always slightly surprised by what I do. In other words, activity is out there, it exists, but it's misleading to say that it is done by independent rational subjects. Now, as I complete years of planning and writing this book, I find Latour's words apt. a book has come into being. I mean, not quite yet, it's not actually published yet, but whatever. A book has sort of come into being. But is it really accurate to say that I wrote it? I mean, in some sense, yeah, I assembled the ideas and the words. Certainly the fingers that I identify as mine did the typing. But the ideas are not mine. I don't mean only that this book often borrows ideas first expressed by others, but of course that's true. I mean also that even the most creative and personal of my contributions appeared in my head, or at least that's where I think they appeared. I did not make them, right? If someone named Joshua Shannon looked at the art and read the books and took the notes and made the outlines and typed the sentences, collaborating, of course, with countless teachers, students, editors, etc., that author is also actually a genetic pattern, right? A collection of molecules and organisms originating with particular DNA and raised under certain conditions. The resulting book is a battery of images, thoughts, emotions, and appeals. It's a condensation of energy that will exist in various forms: printed, electronic, spoken, quietly remembered. We can hope for an audiobook, whatever, for a period of time. And then that book too, like its author, will pass out of existence. And that energy will be taken up elsewhere by an interspecies collaboration of fighters, dancers, and sentinels. Thank you.